Eleanor Ashcombe stepped down from the carriage at the gates of Cravensworth 2 hours before dawn, and did not run. The 7 brides before her had each made the same choice in reverse. They had stepped down, looked at the estate as it loomed in the late October mist, listened to whatever the house had whispered to them in the small hours, and gone back into their carriages before the first servant could light a lamp. The road from London bore the ruts of their hurried departures, the way a battlefield bears the shape of a retreat. Eleanor did not look at the house. She looked at the gravel under her own boots, set her carpet-bag down upon it, as if she meant to claim that small square of England, and turned her face toward the Orchard Road, which was where the sound of a horse was coming from. The horse arrived first, then the man. Sebastian Hartwell, Duke of Cravensworth, drew up before her at a walking pace, the gelding's flanks dark with steam from a long ride, the Duke's boots wet to the knee where he had cut through the wet grass between the apple rows. He had a riding crop in his right hand, and he did not raise it. His left hand rested on the reins with the easy authority of a man who had been on a horse since he was 4. His coat was black wool, his shirt open at the throat, and the firelight leaking from the gatehouse caught the edges of him in a way that revealed quite a great deal. The wide shoulders, the square jaw, the grey eyes that had been awake too long. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he was certain he had already solved. "I am not," Eleanor said quietly, "going to flee." "They all say that," the Duke answered. His voice was low and very even, which was worse than shouting. The 7 brides had described, in the breathless letters they had sent to Lady Bracehill afterward, a duke who barely spoke. Eleanor had read those letters. Her father had filed them. "Yes," she said. "I imagine they did. I am also not asking your permission to wait until breakfast." He swung down. He landed lightly for a man of his size, and stood in front of her without coming any closer. The horse blew once and was still. He named her then. She named him back. The Duke observed that she had not brought a maid. Eleanor explained the maid was waiting at the inn at Stoneham, and that she had not wished the woman to see what she had been told to expect. He asked what it was that she had been told to expect. She told him. She told him that he received his brides before sunrise, that something happened between the carriage and the breakfast room, which drove sensible women to demand horses, that 7 women had already, between this gate and that door, found whatever it was sufficient cause to consider themselves no longer engaged. She kept her hands folded in front of her travelling coat, a dark bronze silk her mother had chosen, 8 years gone, and the only garment in her wardrobe that did not feel borrowed. She did not look at the house. She looked at him. He asked, in a single, soft phrase, what it was that she expected. She answered that she would prefer to find it out for herself. The Duke was silent. A leaf fell between them. Somewhere beyond the gatehouse, a stable boy was whistling a tune Eleanor recognized from the Drovers' Road and did not place. "You should leave," Hartwell said at last. "I will send the carriage back to Stoneham. I will write to your father by the noon post and tell him the engagement is dissolved by my fault, not yours. You will not be ruined. I will see to it." "My father is dead," Eleanor said. "He died in March. You will have to write to my brother, who is a curate in Lincolnshire, and he will write back to ask if there has been a misunderstanding, because his sister has agreed to a match that is, on every available metric, advantageous, and he cannot understand why it is being dissolved at the bridegroom's request before the bride has so much as crossed the threshold." The Duke's jaw set. He did not look at her like a man who had been outmaneuvered. He looked at her like a man who had just realized he was being seen for the first time in a great many years. "It is cold out here," Eleanor said, "and I have come a great distance. Will you let me into your house, Your Grace, or will you make me ask you a 3rd time?" He picked up her carpet-bag himself, which surprised her, and led her up the gravel drive in the half-dark. He did not offer his arm. He did not, in fact, offer her anything, except to walk at her pace, which was slower than his own, and to slow further when the gravel turned to wet stone at the steps. The orchard smelled of wood smoke and bruised apples. A single lamp had been lit in the great hall window, by some servant who had heard the carriage, and was now, Eleanor suspected, watching them through the glass. The clock in the hall struck the half-hour. It was 4:30 in the morning, and Eleanor Ashcombe, who had every reason in the world to flee, had become the first bride in the history of Cravensworth to enter the house. She did not yet know that the woman whose portrait hung in the locked east wing was alive in Florence, that a letter from her had arrived at the gatehouse at exactly the same hour every Tuesday for the past 8 years, or that the woman now descending the staircase in peacock blue silk had been intercepting those letters since before Eleanor was old enough to read. She suspected. That was why she had not run. The woman on the stairs was Lady Augusta Moresby, the Duke's aunt by marriage, and her smile, when she reached the bottom step, was the smile of a person who had not expected the play to last beyond the first act. She greeted him by his given name, in a voice cool enough to chill the very air between them, observing that he had brought the bride in, and asking, with delicate solicitude, whether the young lady understood what she had agreed to. The Duke replied that he had not yet had the chance to ask her. Eleanor looked, very deliberately, at Lady Augusta. The aunt was beautiful, strikingly so, even at the brittle age of 58, with iron-pale hair coiled tightly under sapphire combs, and a complexion that had refused to soften for half a century. Her gown was peacock blue silk, immaculate, despite the hour, which told Eleanor the woman had not slept. "Lady Moresby," Eleanor said, "I understand a great deal more than you wish me to. We may discuss the rest after breakfast." The aunt's smile did not move. Her eyes did. Eleanor saw it, the small, sharp recalculation of a woman who had counted 7 cards into the trick, and just discovered an 8th where there ought not to have been one. "How charming," Lady Augusta said. "Mrs. Pennycook will see you to the green room. Sebastian, a word when you have a moment." "After breakfast," Sebastian Hartwell said, without turning his head. The aunt withdrew. The Duke set down Eleanor's carpet-bag at the foot of the staircase and looked at her with something very close to apology and something very far from welcome. "Whatever you have heard," he said quietly, "is not the half of it." "I am counting on that," Eleanor said. She slept 3 hours. She did not dream. When she woke, it was 9 in the morning, and the autumn light through the green room window was the precise gold of cider warming on a stove. A maid had laid out a hot pitcher and a clean linen towel. Eleanor washed her face, pinned her hair with the copper pin her mother had given her on her 12th birthday, and went down to breakfast in the same dark bronze travelling silk, because her trunk had not yet arrived from Stoneham, and because, in any case, she did not intend to dress for Lady Augusta. The breakfast room faced east. The Duke was already seated at the head of the table, a stack of estate correspondence to his right, a cup of black coffee untouched at his elbow. He stood when she entered, which surprised her. Lady Augusta, at the foot of the table, did not. The aunt greeted her brightly and trusted that she had slept. Eleanor replied that she had. Lady Augusta inquired whether Eleanor found Cravensworth pleasing by daylight, and Eleanor remarked that she found it quiet, which she observed was not the same thing. The Duke poured her coffee himself, which was, Eleanor reflected, the second small kindness he had shown her, and possibly the second thing he had done in 8 years that he had not done by ritual. She watched his hands. They were broad, capable, scarred along the right thumb where, her father's notes had once mentioned, a young Sebastian had cut himself, sharpening a hayrake at the age of 14, because he had wished to be useful, and had not wished to be told he was a duke's son. Eleanor had been 10 when she read that note. She had remembered it for 16 years. The aunt suggested that Eleanor would wish to walk the grounds, observing that the orchard was quite lovely in this season, and proposed that Tobin, the stable boy, be sent along as escort. The Duke, very evenly, said that he would walk her himself. A small pause. The aunt's teaspoon clinked against her saucer with an audible deliberation. Lady Augusta acknowledged the courtesy with a single dry word, and was thereafter silent. Eleanor cut a piece of dark bread very neatly, and did not look up. They walked from the breakfast room down through the rose terrace, where the rose canes had been cut back for the winter, and stood in their iron frames like a row of clenched fists, and out into the orchard, where the apples that had not been gathered lay rotting sweetly in the wet grass. The Duke walked with his hands clasped behind his back. He had not put on a hat. The autumn light caught the grey at his temples, which she had not noticed before. There was a thread of it, just at the edges, premature and very soft. He remarked that she had said her father was gone. She replied, in March, taken with a sudden chill at 56, and added that she did not need consolation, only a moment of it understood. He gave her the single word back, very quietly, as a soldier returns a salute. She felt that single word in her chest in a way that surprised her. She did not let it show. "He had been your father's solicitor," Eleanor said, "and after your father's death, yours. You may not remember meeting me. I was 12 and you were 13, and we sat at opposite ends of a long table while my father read out the entail, and your father drank too much port and called me clever for adding up the columns faster than the clerk." The Duke stopped walking. He remembered, he told her. The green ribbons, the clerk corrected twice. Eleanor said, with the faintest possible smile, that it had been 3 times. The clerk had been wrong about a tithe. The Duke repeated the count back to her, 3 times, and looked at her. The look held longer than either of them was strictly comfortable with. Eleanor felt, beneath the bronze silk, the very precise location of her own pulse. She did not move. He asked her, finally, why she was here. She told him, plainly, that she had read his file. She had practiced the sentence on the road. It came out exactly as she had wanted it to. Quiet, plain, entirely without coyness. She had learned, watching her father across 30 years of negotiating other people's disasters, that the truth, delivered without flourish, was harder to refuse than the most elegant lie. He echoed the word back, only the one, file, with a careful slowness, as if testing whether the syllable still held the same weight in this autumn light as it had once held in his father's study. Your father's death, the codicil to the entail, the marriage settlements, the matter of... She paused very briefly to weigh the word. The matter of Madeline. The Duke went very still. Even the breath went out of him for a moment, as though she had struck him in a place he had successfully forgotten was vulnerable. The horse, somewhere in the lower paddock, snorted. A leaf came down between them. He said, at last, that she had read it. She told him she had. After her father's passing, she had been required to. The cases had not been in order. She had sat in his study for 6 weeks going through them, and his had been the only file her father had kept locked. She had broken the lock. She had read the file. She had burned nothing, copied nothing, told no soul living, not her brother, not his aunt, no one. He asked why. She answered that she had needed to know what kind of man he was. He asked what she had decided. She told him she had decided he had been waiting for someone to know. The Duke looked away. His jaw worked. Eleanor watched his hand close very slowly on the curve of an apple tree branch and not break it, which was a discipline she found she could feel through her own ribcage. He told her, in the lowest voice he had used yet, that he would not lie to her. She told him that she would not have believed him if he had tried. His aunt, he observed, did not know that she had read the file. Eleanor answered that his aunt would not have permitted her to come if she had. Hartwell looked back at her then. There was, just for a moment, a flicker in the grey eyes that Eleanor had not seen in any of the 7 previous brides' letters. Humour. Not bright humour, the worn, surprised humour of a man who has not been amused in years and does not entirely trust the sensation. He said her name. She said his title back. He asked her to wait 3 days before he told her anything else, and inquired whether she would grant him that. Eleanor answered that she would grant him 4. It was not until that evening, during the soup course, that Eleanor saw the locked door in the east wing for the first time. She had asked Mrs. Pennycook, the housekeeper, who had a face like a kindly walnut and an absolute incapacity for discretion, to show her the picture gallery on the pretext of admiring the late Duchess's portraits. Mrs. Pennycook, delighted to be solicited, had taken her up the back stair and led her along a corridor of paintings, and at the end of the corridor was a door of dark oak, banded in iron, locked with a brass plate set above a keyhole that had been deliberately filled with sealing wax. Eleanor asked, quite mildly, what lay behind it. Mrs. Pennycook's face closed, very slightly, the way an oyster closes when touched, and she answered that those were His Grace's first apartments, no longer used. Eleanor inquired how long they had stood unused. The housekeeper answered, 8 years. Eleanor asked after the key. There was no key, Mrs. Pennycook said. His Grace had had the lock altered. Eleanor laid her palm against the wood. The oak was warm. There was a fire behind the door then. Somebody, on the other side, was keeping the rooms at temperature. The lock was wax-sealed. The wood was warm. Both of those things together were not a closed apartment. They were a preserved one. She thanked Mrs. Pennycook softly and remarked that she had seen enough of the gallery for one day. She returned to the green room and sat at the writing desk and did not light the candle for a long time. She watched the dusk gather over the orchard. She heard, from very far away, a stable boy whistling that same drover's tune. She thought about the warmth of the wood under her palm. She thought about the locked file in her father's study, and the sealing wax in the plate, and the 7 brides who had been brought to this house and shown, she was now reasonably certain, exactly enough of the east wing to make their flight inevitable. Whoever was tending the fire behind that door, it was not the Duke. The next morning she breakfasted with Lady Augusta alone. The aunt, in apricot silk this time, was charm itself. She poured chocolate, observed that Sebastian rode early and would not bother them until 11, and proposed that they speak as women. Eleanor agreed by all means. The aunt remarked that Eleanor was, she gathered, an unusual young woman. She had not fled. Eleanor confirmed that she had not. Lady Augusta pronounced this admirable. Eleanor offered, dryly, that admirable was indeed the word for it. Lady Augusta smiled. She had, Eleanor noticed, very fine teeth, and the kind of laugh that arrived a fraction of a second before it was warranted, the way an actress's does. She was performing. She had been performing, in this room, for so many years that the performance had acquired the texture of sincerity. Eleanor had read her father's notes on this woman, too. There were many. One of them, in the margin of a settlement document, said simply, "A pleasant manner is not a reliable witness." The aunt observed, with delicate gravity, that Eleanor would be wondering about the previous engagements. Eleanor, equally delicately, replied that she was unsurprised that her ladyship wished to discuss them. The aunt acknowledged the matter, yes, and poured more chocolate. The truth, she said, was a delicate one. Her nephew had been bereaved, profoundly, and the household, by which she meant the staff, by which she meant people who had served this family longer than was good for them, had not been able to relinquish her. Eleanor lifted only the one word back across the table. Her. His late wife, the aunt explained, Madeline. She had been unusual. The word came with a fractional pause, and had inspired devotion. After her passing, the house had clung to her. It still did. The young ladies who came here were sensitive, and they felt it, and they preferred not to remain in a house where the previous Duchess was so palpably remembered. Eleanor allowed the adverb to hang between them, and merely repeated it, palpably, so that it might be heard for what it was. There were footsteps, dear, the aunt continued, smoothly. There were voices in corridors. One did not wish to alarm, but one was honest. Cravensworth was haunted, in the sense in which any ancient house was haunted, by memory. Some young women could not bear it. Sebastian was kind, but he refused to remove the things that held her here, which was, of course, his right. But it was also why, well, Eleanor would understand. Eleanor met the aunt's eyes across the chocolate pot and asked, very evenly, how exactly the Duke's first wife had passed. The aunt's hand did not tremble. The aunt's hand did not need to. There was a flicker at the corner of the aunt's mouth, very brief, and then a smooth resumption. In childbirth, Lady Augusta answered. A daughter, lost at birth. Sebastian had never spoken of it. Eleanor inquired after the date. April, the aunt said. 8 years ago. Why? Eleanor remarked that her father's notes did not record the passing. The aunt offered, swiftly, that her father had not handled it. They had engaged a London firm. The discretion of her dear nephew. Eleanor said quietly, then, that His Grace's solicitor for matters of estate, marriage, and entail had been her father since the Duke was 21 years of age. There was no London firm. There was no record entered in the parish register of St. Bartholomew's, Cravensworth, for a duchess of this house in that April. She had checked the register on her way down. She had asked the rector, who had been charming, somewhat surprised by the request, and entirely certain that there had been no such entry. The aunt set down the chocolate pot. She remarked, with the first audible thinness in her voice, that Eleanor had been busy. Eleanor answered, with all the politeness in the world, that she had been thorough. There was a long silence, of the kind in which two opponents recognize each other across a board on which the pieces have suddenly been reset. A clock in the next room struck 9. Outside, beyond the orchard, the Duke's horse could be heard returning at a hand gallop. Lady Augusta lifted her cup, sipped, set it down with absolute precision. She would not, the aunt told her pleasantly, find what she was looking for. Eleanor answered that this rather depended on what she was looking for. The aunt observed that, in that case, she should very much like to know. Eleanor observed, in turn, that she should very much like the aunt to wonder. Lady Augusta smiled. It was a thin smile, and it did not reach the sapphire combs. But it was a smile, and it acknowledged, in its way, that the chocolate had cooled and the conversation had turned, and that the 8th bride was not, after all, the same as the 7 before. The aunt cautioned her, softly, that houses such as this one had ways of removing what did not belong in them. Eleanor answered, with the smallest possible incline of her head, that it was fortunate, then, that she did. The next day she walked to the gatehouse alone. She had asked Mrs. Pennycook, casually, who collected the Morning Post, and Mrs. Pennycook had said, even more casually, that her ladyship preferred to take it from the gatehouse herself, on her morning walk, before the Duke came down, because His Grace did not enjoy being interrupted at breakfast. Eleanor had nodded, and changed the subject to roses. She had not asked again. She had simply walked, just before noon on the 3rd day, down the gravel to the gatehouse, where the gatekeeper, a wiry old soldier named Quigley, touched his hat to her and asked if she required anything. She remarked that she was told letters arrived on a Tuesday. Quigley's face did not change. He confirmed that they did. She asked whether always on a Tuesday. Without fail, he answered, these 8 years past. From where? She pressed. A pause, just slightly too long. And then the answer, Italy. To whom were they addressed? The gatekeeper looked, for a long second, at the hedge beside her shoulder before answering. To His Grace. And did His Grace receive them? Quigley did not answer. She softened her voice. She told him plainly that she was not the previous 7. She was here on a different errand. She asked whether he knew how long he had been intercepting his master's post. He answered that it was not he. She told him she knew it was not he, and asked, very gently, whether he had one of them with him today, for her. The old soldier hesitated. He was, Eleanor saw, a man who had survived 2 campaigns and a first marriage and a great many things by the simple expedient of not interfering. But he was also, like most of his generation, deeply suspicious of women in peacock blue silk, and deeply attached to the Duke, who had been a 13-year-old boy with skinned knees the year Quigley had taken the post. He looked once over his shoulder, as if any moment Lady Augusta might appear out of the hedgerow. He told her that he did have one. The aunt had not come for it yet. He was to hand it over at 3. If Eleanor took it, he would tell her ladyship it had never arrived, and would swear it on the parish register if he must. Eleanor told him, gently, that he would not have to swear anything, and asked him simply to bring it to her. He brought it. It was a thin envelope, sealed in dark wax, addressed in a neat continental hand to His Grace the Duke of Cravensworth. The wax bore the impression of an unfamiliar device, a vine, a tower, a single letter M. She named him by his name, and he answered, and she asked him how many of these the aunt had taken. The gatekeeper looked at his boots. "All of them, miss," he said. "Every Tuesday, for 8 years." Eleanor asked, very softly, whether the Duke knew. He knew there were letters, the old soldier told her. He believed his wife sent them. He had been told she would not see him, would not receive him in Italy, would not communicate beyond the monthly note, and that the only kindness he could do her was to leave her in peace. Her ladyship read them aloud to him, the gatekeeper said, once a month, in the library, after dinner. Eleanor closed her hand on the letter very gently, as if it were a living thing. The single word came out of her almost without breath. Read them. From her own copy, the gatekeeper explained. The originals her ladyship kept. She had told him, the first time he had tried to put one into his Grace's hand directly, that she would have him dismissed without a character before the noon post. He had a daughter in service in London, Miss. He had had a daughter to think of for 8 years. Eleanor told him quietly that he had done what he could. He told her, lower still, that he had done less than that. She looked the gatekeeper full in the face and gave him the instruction in plain words. From this day forward, he would report only to her. If a letter came, it went to her. If her ladyship asked, she had never visited the gatehouse. Were they agreed? The old soldier straightened very slightly. Something, some long, flattened thing, came back into his shoulders that had not been there in a long time. They were agreed, he said. She walked back along the orchard road with the letter inside her coat, against her ribs, the way a soldier carries a sealed order. The wax was warm against her skin by the time she reached the rose terrace. She did not break the seal. She had no right to. The letter was not for her. She found the Duke in the library, alone, at the desk where his father had signed the entail. He was writing, slowly, the way a man writes who is no longer sure why he writes. The fire was lit. The afternoon light through the leaded windows caught the cut of his cheekbone and the precise angle of his shoulders bent over the page. And Eleanor, who had, until that morning, considered herself a woman of considerable composure, felt, for one inconvenient instant, exactly what the 7 previous brides had presumably felt at this hour, in this light, in this room. That the man at this desk was not safe, in the sense of safe from feeling, and that staying in his vicinity was going to require her to be braver than she had planned to be. She stayed. "Your Grace?" He looked up, the pen stilled. "Miss Ashcombe?" "I have something for you. You may not wish to receive it from me. It belongs to you, and I would prefer to give it to you with the seal still on it, so that you may decide for yourself what to read and what to burn." She walked the length of the library to the desk and laid the letter, vine and tower side up, on the blotter beside his right hand. The Duke did not move. He looked at the wax. He looked at her. The color left his face very precisely, and then returned in a different shape. "Where did you get this?" "From your gatekeeper," Eleanor said. "He has been instructed, for 8 years, to give them to your aunt. He has not been able to refuse. He is a good man. You should not blame him. There are 8 years' worth of these, Your Grace. They are not in this house. If they exist, they are in your aunt's apartments. I do not yet know in which drawer." The Duke picked up the letter. His hand, broad and capable, and scarred at the right thumb, was steady. He did not break the seal. He turned the envelope over and over, like a man rereading a sentence in a language he had once known and recently doubted. "My wife," he said, "is alive." Yes, Your Grace. Madeline. Yes. He set the letter down. He braced his palm on the desk. He breathed out, a single, long breath, and Eleanor watched a man who had been holding 8 years of grief like a sword above his own head decide, in a measurable second, to set the sword down. Why? He said, very low. Why? That, Eleanor said, is for you to ask her. I can show you the law. I can show you what the situation is, in fact. I cannot show you what was in her mind 8 years ago, because I do not know. I suspect, and the suspicion is a guess, that she did not have the letters returned because she did not want to be hunted. I suspect she has been writing every Tuesday because she did not wish to disappear. I suspect that what your aunt has read aloud to you in this room has been an invention, or a translation that suited her purposes. I do not know. I will not pretend to know. You read these, he said. The originals, in your father's file. No, I read your father's file. I read the codicil. I read the marriage settlement. I read the inheritance entail, which I will need to discuss with you tomorrow. I have never in my life read your wife's letters. I do not consider them mine to read. The Duke looked at her. He looked at her for a very long time. He looked at her the way a man looks at the first piece of evidence in 8 years that the world is, in fact, knowable. Eleanor. It was the first time he had used her name. She did not let herself flinch. Your Grace, I am going to break this seal, he said, in front of you, because I do not trust myself to read it alone. Will you stay? I will stay. He broke the seal. The letter was in Italian. It was 4 pages long. It was dated the previous Tuesday in Florence. Eleanor watched him read it. She watched a face she had thought to be permanently shuttered open, line by line, like a series of doors. By the 3rd page he was sitting down. By the 4th, he had set the page on his knee and was looking at the fire. She is well, he said after a long time. She has been well. She runs a small school, with the man she lives with. She has not asked me to come. She has, every Tuesday, asked me to forgive her. Her last letter, here, the one I have just read, asks me to free us both, to pursue the annulment she requested in the 3rd month after she left. She says she has been writing the same paragraph every Tuesday for 8 years because she could not bear to think I had heard it and not answered. He folded the page very carefully along its existing creases. I never received it, he said. Any of them. I know. She believed I refused. All these years. I know. My aunt. Yes. There was a silence. It was not, this time, a silence of 7 brides at a gate. It was the silence of a man calculating, in a single sitting, the exact dimensions of a betrayal, carried out under his own roof, in his own household, by a woman he had trusted to mother him after his own mother died. Eleanor did not interrupt the calculation. She poured him a glass of brandy from the side cabinet. She set it at his elbow. She sat in the chair opposite the desk and put her hands in her lap and waited. Why? He said again. But this time the question was not for the air, it was for her. Why did she do it? Because if your wife had returned, or you had pursued the annulment, you would have remarried. You would have produced an heir. Her son, your cousin Edmund, would not have inherited. Edmund. Yes. He is 26. He has been her project since he was 8. I know. How do you know? My father wrote it down, Eleanor said. My father wrote down everything. He did not know what was happening. He did not have proof. He had a column of suspicions, and no signed paper to put behind any of them. He died before he could act. I have been reading his suspicions every night for 6 months. The Duke laughed, just once. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man recognizing the shape of a trap that had been built in the room he had been pacing for 8 years. "You came here," he said, "knowing all this." "I came here knowing some of it. I came to find the rest." "You could have been killed, Miss Ashcombe." "I was not unwary." "My aunt. Your aunt does not yet understand what I have. I would like to keep it that way until tomorrow afternoon, when Lord Hervey arrives from London. I have written him. He will arrive at 3. He will bring the original engagement of services your father signed with your father in 1808, which establishes that there is no London firm, and never has been. We will have the parish register from Cravensworth, which I have already copied with the rector's permission. We will have your wife's letter, broken seal and all, with the postmark from Florence and the date. We will have, if Quigley will swear it, and he will, the testimony of the gatekeeper that he has been instructed for 8 years to give the post to her ladyship. That is enough, Your Grace. That is enough to begin." "To begin what?" "The annulment your wife asked for, 8 years ago. And, after it, anything you choose to begin next." The Duke set his hand over hers on the desk. It was the first time he had touched her. His palm was warm, and broader than her father's had been, and a small, dispassionate part of Eleanor's brain noted the calluses along the inner edge. The calluses of a man who did, in fact, ride and fence and lift hayrakes, and was not merely a duke. The rest of her brain noted that her own hand had stopped moving entirely. "Miss Ashcombe." "Your Grace. I do not know what to do with this." "You will know," she said, very quietly, "by tomorrow afternoon. I am going to leave you the letter. I am going to dine with your aunt and behave entirely as I behaved this morning. I am going to mention nothing. I am going to allow her to believe the 8th bride is, if a little tiresome, ultimately just like the rest. Tomorrow afternoon, when Lord Hervey arrives, I will not be tiresome. I will simply be present. After that, I will be at your disposal, or your aunt's, or my brother's in Lincolnshire, whichever you prefer." He did not let go of her hand. "I should very much prefer," he said slowly, "that you stay." "Then ask me," Eleanor said, "after Lord Hervey has gone, not before." She slipped her hand out from under his with great gentleness, and rose, and walked the long length of the library back to the door. Halfway there she stopped, without quite knowing why. She turned. The Duke was still at the desk, the broken seal in his hand, the firelight steady on the side of his face. He was watching her go the way a man watches a sail come over the horizon for the first time in a very long winter. "Your Grace." "Yes?" "You should know. I lied to you a little this morning about the file. There was one thing of yours I read that I had no right to. A note your father wrote in the margin of the entail when you were 6 years old. He wrote, 'The boy is gentle. Do not let the title harden him.' I did not burn it. I memorized it. It is in my pocket. I will return it to you tomorrow." She left. The door closed behind her. The Duke sat for a long time at his desk, with the open letter in front of him, and then, slowly, he laughed. A laugh that began as something small and rueful, and ended, against every probability, as warmth. Dinner that evening was a study in containment. Eleanor wore the same dark bronze travelling sock for the 3rd day running, because her trunk had still not arrived, and because, in any case, she did not intend to spend the courage of a fresh gown until tomorrow. Lady Augusta was in saffron silk and emeralds. The Duke had dressed for dinner. Black coat, silver buttons, a white cravat tied with the slightly imperfect knot of a man who had refused his valet's assistance, and was, Eleanor noted, more present at the table than he had been since her arrival. He listened to his aunt with unbroken courtesy. He turned the conversation, twice, when she pressed on the subject of Eleanor's brother in Lincolnshire. He laughed once, briefly, at a remark of Eleanor's about the rector at Stoneham, and Lady Augusta's teaspoon paused, very slightly, on its way to the sugar bowl. "You are in better spirits, Sebastian," the aunt said. "I have been writing," he said. "It clears the head." "And you, Miss Ashcombe?" How do you find your second day?
Productive, Eleanor said.
Indeed.
I walked to the gatehouse. I met your gatekeeper. He was very obliging.
A flicker. Just a flicker. Lady Augusta's cup, this time, made it to the saucer without sound. Old Quigley. He has been with the family for 30 years.
He spoke very highly of his post, Eleanor said. He is a man, I think, who takes his responsibilities seriously.
Indeed.
I asked him about the morning correspondence.
The aunt's eyes did not move. The Duke's, opposite, did not move either, except to glance, very briefly, at Eleanor across the soup tureen, with something that, in another man, might have been a warning, and in this man was, she thought, admiration. Country posts are notoriously irregular, Lady Augusta said.
He told me,
Eleanor went on pleasantly, as if she had not heard the diversion,
that you collect it yourself, before His Grace comes down. I think that very thoughtful, Lady Augusta. I should not like to think of His Grace being troubled at breakfast.
Sebastian dislikes being interrupted.
He has said as much, has he?
He has.
How attentive of you to have noticed.
A small, sharp silence. The footman cleared the soup. The fish was brought. The Duke poured wine for himself, and then, after a deliberate pause, for Eleanor. Lady Augusta's glass he did not refresh. Not pointedly, but not absent-mindedly either. The aunt's hand closed on her empty wineglass and rested there, white at the knuckles, and then released. You are a clever girl, Miss Ashcombe.
I have heard worse said.
I should hate to think you were trying to be too clever.
My father used to say,
Eleanor said, lifting her own glass in a small, precise toast that included no one,
that the woman who is too clever finds her own match in the end. He meant it as a warning. I have always taken it as encouragement.
The Duke did not smile. He did, very briefly, lift his own glass in answer. Lady Augusta saw it. Her mouth tightened a millimeter only, but Eleanor felt it across the table the way a fisherman feels a strike. The hook was in. It would not come out before tomorrow. She walked Eleanor up the staircase herself, the aunt did, after dinner. Sebastian had withdrawn to the library, to read, he said, alone, without specifying what, and Eleanor had risen to retire, and Lady Augusta had risen at the same moment, and had said, with absolute graciousness, that she would see the dear girl to her room. Eleanor had agreed. She had agreed with a smile of perfect demureness, the kind of smile that has, for 10,000 years, been the camouflage of women in libraries and parlours, and at the tops of dark staircases. They paused on the landing. The corridor that led to the green room ran one way. The corridor that led toward the locked east wing ran the other. Lady Augusta's hand, gloved against the chill, lay lightly on the banister. Miss Ashcombe.
Yes, my lady.
You will leave tomorrow morning.
Will I?
You are not, I find, suited to this house. I have been gentle about it because I have a fondness for your father, who was a decent man. I will arrange the carriage at first light. Sebastian will be told you have been called home by your brother. You will receive a letter from me, which you will accept, in compensation for any inconvenience. You will marry a curate, Miss Ashcombe, in the country, and in 5 years you will tell your friends about the autumn you almost married a duke, and you will laugh about it. That is my advice. I urge you to take it.
Lady Augusta, Eleanor said, walk me to the locked door.
The aunt's hand on the banister tightened. I beg your pardon.
The locked door, my lady, in the east wing. Mrs. Pennycook showed it to me yesterday afternoon. I have not been able, since, to think of anything else. Walk me to it now. I should like to see it, with you.
In the dark. I will not. Why not?
Because there is nothing to see.
And yet the wood is warm. The fire on the other side is being kept by somebody. I know it is not the Duke. I know it is not Mrs. Pennycook. I begin to think it is somebody who is paid by you, my lady, to keep that fire, to keep the rooms exactly as they were 8 years ago, on the day Madeline left. so that any bride foolish enough to ask after the previous Duchess might be shown a door she could not open, and a household that had not let her go. "Is that," Eleanor said very quietly, "approximately the shape of it?" The aunt did not move. The corridor was very quiet. Down at the end of it somewhere, a door clicked softly. Mrs. Pennycook, perhaps, retiring to her own quarters. "You will leave tomorrow," Lady Augusta said again. The voice was smaller now. The pleasantness had gone out of it. "I will leave when His Grace asks me to. Lord Hervey arrives at 3. He will bring documents. We will, all of us, sit in the morning room together. You will be present. You will not be permitted to absent yourself. After that, my lady, we shall see whose carriage is called for." Lord Hervey. My father's old colleague. You have not heard the name. I am not surprised. He has been holding my father's working notes on this house for 8 years, waiting for someone to give him the one signed paper that would let him act. He has it now. Good night, my lady. I shall see myself the rest of the way to my room. Eleanor went to bed. She did not sleep particularly well. She was not afraid. Fear had taken the morning carriage and gone. But she was tired, in the bones, in a way she did not remember being tired before. She woke once at 3 to the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside her door. The footsteps did not pause. They went on, past her room, toward the stairs. She heard them descend. She heard, an hour later, a horse leave the stable yard at a hard gallop, and a horse return, more slowly, at 5. When she came down to breakfast at 9, Lady Augusta was not at the table. The Duke was. He looked, Eleanor thought, like a man who had not slept and was nevertheless rested, in the way that exhausted soldiers are sometimes rested, by having, at last, a clear thing to do. "My aunt," he said, "received a letter at 4 in the morning by special courier. She has gone to her son in Hertfordshire. She left a note on her dressing table, requesting that you be given the use of the carriage to Stoneham at your earliest convenience." How thoughtful. She has also taken with her a valise that contained, I am informed by Mrs. Pennycook, a great many letters she should not have had. Mrs. Pennycook unfortunately observed her packing it. How clumsy of her. Mrs. Pennycook has been in this household 41 years, Miss Ashcombe. She has, I learned this morning, been waiting for some months for permission to dislike my aunt openly. I gave it to her at 4:30. She wept. "And the locked door will be opened this afternoon, when Lord Hervey arrives. He is bringing a locksmith. The fires beyond it, I am also told, have been tended for 8 years by a woman from the village, who was paid in coin and silence. She has consented to give a sworn statement. I told her she would have a pension. She fainted, very briefly, and then accepted." Eleanor sat down. The coffee was poured. She lifted the cup, found her hand was perfectly steady, and looked across the table at Sebastian Hartwell, Duke of Cravensworth, who was looking back at her with an expression she had not previously seen on a duke's face in any portrait, in any drawing room, in any of the 7 brides' letters. Relief, undisguised, and astonishment undisguised. And one other thing she chose, for the present, not to name. "You should know," he said, "that I rode to Stoneham at 3 this morning. I retrieved your trunk. It is in the green room. I did not wish you to face today in the same gown for a 4th day running. I have caused you, I think, considerable trouble already, without my also depriving you of clean linen." "That was," Eleanor began, and to her absolute fury, found that her voice was suddenly not steady. "Drink your coffee, Miss Ashcombe." She drank her coffee. Lord Hervey arrived at 2:45, 20 minutes early, in a chaise drawn by a pair of bays so muddied at the fetlocks that it was clear he had ridden through the night. He was a small, grey, immaculate man of 70, who had been Eleanor's father's correspondent for 30 years, and who, on alighting, embraced her with a brief professional fierceness that was, from him, almost demonstrative. The locksmith arrived behind him in the dog-cart.
Mrs. Pennycook had the rector's copy of the parish register laid out on the morning room table. Quigley, in a coat brushed for the occasion, stood to one side with the air of an old soldier, reporting at last to an officer he could trust. The Duke had, in some unspoken arrangement Eleanor had not directed, called the senior staff into the morning room as witnesses: the steward, the head groom, the butler, 2 footmen, all standing along the walls like a court. Lady Augusta was, of course, absent. Eleanor watched the morning room fill up and thought, she chose not to be cornered. That, in its own way, is a confession. The proceedings were quick. Lord Hervey laid out the documents, the parish register was examined, the letter from Florence was produced, intact with its broken seal. Quigley swore, in a steady voice, to the 8 years of intercepted post. The locksmith was sent up with the head groom to open the east wing door, and returned, 15 minutes later, with an apartment's worth of preserved evidence. The dressing gown still on the back of the chair, the brushes still on the dresser, the bed turned down, the fire freshly stoked. 8 years of a tableau that had been maintained with exactly the precision of a stage set. "I will not draft the annulment in this room," Lord Hervey said. "I will draft it at my chambers tomorrow, on Sebastian's instruction, and I will have it before the courts within the fortnight. There is no impediment. The Duchess has, in her own hand, requested it in a letter postmarked 5 days ago. There are 8 years of consistent precedent in her unanswered correspondence. The grounds are willful and continued absence. The ecclesiastical court will not contest. The civil court will not contest. The Duchess," he looked at Sebastian, "has said in this letter that she wishes you to be free." Sebastian Hartwell was, Eleanor thought, the most controlled man she had ever seen in a moment of becoming free. He stood at the window with his hands behind his back. He listened. He nodded once. He turned finally and said, "Send word to Florence. Tell her thank you. Tell her I am sorry. Tell her if she wishes ever to come and see the orchard, the gates of Cravensworth will open for her. Tell her my house is hers, in whatever sense she still wishes to think of it. And then, Hervey, file the papers. Tomorrow morning, Your Grace. Tonight, if you can." Hervey bowed, gathered his papers, and went out to write his letters. The morning room emptied. The witnesses bowed and went back to their work, and Mrs. Pennycook, on her way out, wiped her eyes very thoroughly with a corner of her apron, and patted Eleanor's arm with a force that suggested 41 years of pent-up regard. The locksmith was paid. The east wing door was left open. Sebastian had ordered it. The window in that suite, after 8 years closed, was opened to the autumn air. Mrs. Pennycook had already arranged for the bed linen to be taken down and burned. The dressing gown went to the village charity. The brushes were given to the woman who had tended the fires, who had, when offered them, shaken her head and asked, instead, for a place in service somewhere far from this house, which Sebastian arranged before nightfall. By 6 o'clock, the house was astonishingly quiet. By 7 it was warm. Mrs. Pennycook had ordered fires lit in every room on the ground floor, and the autumn dusk through the long windows turned the whole interior the color of cider warming on a stove. Sebastian found Eleanor in the library at 7:30. She was sitting in the chair by the fire, not the chair opposite the desk where she had sat the day before, but the great wing chair to the left of the hearth, with one of his books open on her knee. It was a volume of Cooper. She had, against her habits, taken off her shoes. The copper hairpin was on the side table. Her hair, very dark in the firelight, had loosened around her temples. He stood for a moment in the doorway. She did not look up. "Your Grace." "Sebastian," he said. "Sebastian." He came across the rug. He did not sit. He stood at the side of her chair, with his hand braced lightly on the carved finial, and looked down at her in the firelight in a way that ought, by every law of self-preservation she had ever taught herself, to have caused her to look up. She did not. She turned a page of the Cooper she was not reading. "I owe you," he said, "the largest debt I have ever owed any human being. I have been told this afternoon that I will be a free man by Michaelmas. and I will be a free man, because you read your father's papers in the dark for 6 months, and then walked into my gates at 4 in the morning, carrying nothing but a carpet bag and the truth. I do not know how to discharge that debt. It is not a debt, Your Grace. Sebastian, it is not a debt. I read the file because I had to. I came because I chose to. I stayed because once I had walked through the gates, I found I had no interest in walking out again, except in your company. Eleanor. I am asking you, she said, very quietly, still looking at the book, to wait 3 days before you say anything else to me. Will you grant me that? He laughed, just once, and the laugh was the warmest sound she had heard him make. I will grant you 4, he said. The 4 days passed. They were not idle days. Lord Hervey filed the papers. The courier left for Florence. The Stoneham rector was thanked in person with a contribution to the new bell robe. Quigley was given a footman to assist him at the gatehouse, and a small pension to be paid quarterly from the Duke's own purse. Mrs. Pennycook reorganized the household with a cheerfulness that frightened the under-butler and pleased everyone else. Cousin Edmund's allowance was reduced, by order of the Duke, from a sum that would have supported a small estate to a sum that would support a single industrious bachelor, and a letter of explanation was sent that did not mince words. Lady Augusta's apartments at Cravensworth were sealed, pending further instruction. She did not write to her nephew. She wrote instead to a cousin in Paris, who sent the letter back unopened. On the 5th day, after dinner, Sebastian asked Eleanor to walk in the orchard. The light was the cider gold of October at 6 o'clock, and the apples that had not been gathered lay in the wet grass, smelling of bruise and sugar. She wore a dark green gown, her own, finally, from the recovered trunk, and a copper hairpin, and she walked beside him with her hands behind her back, the way he sometimes walked. He noticed. It made him smile. They stopped at the far end of the orchard, where the wall divided the Duke's land from the rector's glebe. The horizon was the line of the Sussex Downs, soft and grey with twilight. Eleanor. Sebastian. My wife, my former wife, has written, by the same Tuesday post. The letter arrived this morning at the gatehouse and was put directly into my hand by Quigley. She thanks me. She wishes me well. She asks one thing of me, which is that, when I marry again, I do so for love, and not for the title, and not for the heir, and not for any reason that resembles the reason I married her. That is a generous request. It is. And I am asking you, he said, turning to her, to do me the very great kindness of permitting me to fulfill it. You came here knowing more about my life than I knew about my own. You stayed when 7 women had not. You walked into my gates at 4 in the morning with 1 carpet bag and a copper hairpin, and you have, in the course of 4 days, restored to me an honest house, a grateful staff, a future I did not believe I possessed, and one, I will admit it, wholly unexpected and entirely deserved second life. I will not insult you by pretending I have known you long. I have known you, in some sense, since you corrected my father's clerk 3 times at the age of 12. I have certainly known you these 8 days, as well as I have ever known anyone. I will marry you, Eleanor Ashcombe, on whatever terms you choose to set. Please set them. I have no defences left. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. The autumn light was on his face, the grey at his temples, the grey of his eyes, the broad, steady shoulders that had filled the doorway of the breakfast room every morning for the past week. She took a single, deliberate breath. 3 terms, she said. Name them. 1. The East Wing rooms will be turned into a working library. They will not be my private apartments. I will not live in any room, ever, that has been kept warm by another woman's ghost. Granted. 2. My brother, the curate, will be invited to Cravensworth at Christmas with his wife and his small daughter, and you will sit through one of his sermons without flinching, even the one on humility, which is very long. Granted. 3. She paused. I love you, Sebastian Hartwell. I have done since the afternoon you carried my carpet bag up the gravel and walked at my pace for the last 20 yards because the stone was wet. I would not say so before today, because we were not at liberty. We are now. I expect you to tell me the same in return at least once a year, in the orchard, on a day without business. I will tell you the same, he said, every Tuesday at the gatehouse when the post arrives. Then it is agreed. It is agreed. He took her hand and kissed it, once on the knuckles in the autumn light, with the bruised apples around his boots. He did not embrace her. He had been a patient flame for too long to spend the moment cheaply. He did not kiss her on the mouth until they were inside the house, on the threshold of the library, with the fire going behind them and Mrs. Pennycook conveniently absent in the kitchen. And then he did, once, slowly, the way a man kisses the woman he intends to be married to for 50 years, and not a day less. Eleanor, who had prepared for many things on the road from London, had not prepared for that. It surprised her sufficiently that she laughed against his mouth, which surprised him. They stood for a moment with their foreheads together in the doorway, and then she stepped back and tucked her copper hairpin more firmly into her hair, and went into dinner. 6 months later, on a soft afternoon in late April, Eleanor Hartwell, Duchess of Cravensworth, stood in the orchard with a basket of cuttings on her arm, supervising old Quigley's grandson, who had been promoted to undergardener and was earnestly mishandling a rose. Sebastian came down the gravel from the house with a letter in his hand. It was Tuesday. The letter was in the same neat continental hand. The seal, Vine, Tower, single letter M, was unbroken. He gave it to his wife. You may open this one, he said. We have agreed. Eleanor broke the seal. She read aloud, while the undergardener pretended not to listen, and Quigley, at the gatehouse, leaned on the post and watched them, with the expression of a man whose post had at last gone where it was meant to go. The letter was short. Madeline, who, it transpired, was now properly married to her wine merchant in Florence, who had been confirmed in her annulment by the courts in February, and who had, of her own free will, sent a small painted icon of St. Catherine to be hung in the rebuilt East Wing library, wrote to congratulate the new Duchess. She wrote that she had heard, by way of a mutual acquaintance in Rome, that the household at Cravensworth was happy. She wrote that she was glad. She wrote that she hoped, one day, the new Duchess of that house would do her the kindness of writing back. She closed by saying that the autumn wind in Florence carried the smell of bruised apples, that it always had, and she had spent 8 years not knowing why it made her cry, and that she now knew, and was no longer sad about it. Eleanor folded the letter, very carefully, along its existing creases. I shall write back tonight, she said. Yes. And invite her to write again, whenever she chooses. Yes. And tell her the orchard is producing this year more apples than the household can use. Yes. He did not say anything for a moment. She looked up at him in the soft April light. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her, half a lifetime younger, across her father's table. The way a man looks at a problem he is suddenly delighted to know he will not solve. Eleanor. Sebastian. It is Tuesday. It is. In the orchard. It is. On a day without business. It is. I love you, he said. I love you too, she said. Do not be late next year. She kissed him, once in the orchard, with the basket of cuttings over her arm and the unsealed letter in her hand, and old Quigley pretending very hard not to see. And then she went back up the gravel toward the house, where Miss Pennycook was making, by sound, a great deal of unnecessary noise in the front hall to give them a few minutes longer in the orchard. Sebastian Hartwell, Duke of Cravensworth, watched his wife go. The orchard smelled of bruised apples. The wind out of the south carried, very faintly, the sound of a stable boy whistling a drover's tune. The 8th bride had stayed. She had asked him why, and in the asking, she had given him back the rest of his life.
If you have ever been the person who walked into a house everyone else had walked out of, the room, the conversation, the friendship, the love, and discovered that the reason it was empty was not the haunting, but the people who had been hiding the haunting from you, leave a comment below and tell me what you found. Subscribe for a new fireside story every week. And, as always, thank you for keeping the fire warm.